Ray had been reading tracks his whole life, which is the only reason he noticed the ones that were reading him back. He was elk hunting solo in the Frank Church, the biggest wilderness in the lower 48 deep Idaho backcountry where you're a full day from anyone. 20 years of hunting that country. He could tell you what walked a trail, when and which way, just from the ground. Hiking in that afternoon, a few miles from where he'd make camp, he crossed a fresh track in the soft dirt of the trail. Bipedal. 2 feet, walking upright, the print long, narrow, deep, like real weight behind it. No boot tread. He figured another hunter, barefoot for some reason, and kept moving. A mile on, he crossed it again. Same track. And this time he could see it had come in from the side, joined the trail, and was walking the same direction he was. Ahead of him. That's the part that turned his stomach the first time. The track was always ahead. Whatever made it had been on the trail before him, going where he was going, at his pace. For the last 3 miles into camp, every soft patch of ground showed it. Always in front. Always headed exactly where he was headed. He told himself a dozen reasonable things. Another hunter with the same plan. An old track he kept recrossing. But an old track doesn't stay fresh, and a hunter leaves at a trailhead, and this one just kept going. Mile after mile toward the one flat spot he'd picked to camp before he'd ever told a living soul where that was. He reached the site at dusk, and the tracks were there, all over the flat ground where he was about to pitch his tent, layered, like something had stood there and waited, shifting its weight for a long time, facing the direction he'd come from. And then they stopped. He circled that whole clearing in the last light, looking for where they left. 20 years reading ground, and he could not find an exit track. The prints came in, they gathered on his campsite, and they did not go out. Not up the trail, not into the brush, not anywhere. Whatever walked ahead of him for 3 miles had arrived at his camp and simply stopped existing on the ground. Ray is not a man who scares easy, and he'll say so. He built his fire big that night, kept his rifle across his lap, and did not sleep. Nothing came. In the morning, the tracks were still there, still layered on his site, still with no exit. He broke camp and hiked out and hunted somewhere else that season. He's never explained it. He says the thing that stays with him isn't that something followed him. It's that it got there first. Every step of the way, it was already ahead of him, waiting on the ground he hadn't reached yet, like it knew the trip better than he did. Tracks that walked 3 miles ahead of him to a campsite he'd told no one about, gathered there like something waiting, and then stopped with no trail out. Before the next account, how late is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. I always want to know who's up in the dark with me, and I read every single one. We're pushing toward 10,000 subscribers before the end of the month. If this account got to you, hit subscribe. Everyone counts. And here's what I can't answer. It was always ahead of him, always waiting on ground he hadn't reached yet. So, did it know where he was going, somehow, before he did? Or is it worse that it wasn't following the trail at all? That it was following him, and getting there first was the whole point? Drop your answer below. Fresh snow is a hunter's best friend, because it can't lie about what walked through it, which is exactly why the tracks around their camp shouldn't have been possible. Dale and his brother-in-law were deer hunting the Superior National Forest up near the Boundary Waters, northern Minnesota, in early season snow. 6 inches of fresh powder overnight, the kind that makes tracking easy. Every animal in the woods writing its story on the ground. They'd snowshoed in and set a camp, and that first morning they cut a track circling their tent. Bipedal. Bare. Long, narrow prints in the fresh snow, walking a slow loop around where they'd slept. And here's the thing about fresh snow. You can see everything. There was no approach. The circling tracks were there, complete loops around the tent, but there was no trail leading into where the circle started. It was as if whatever made them had begun walking in a circle from a standstill, in the middle of untouched snow, with no way of having gotten there. Dale's brother-in-law wanted to leave right then. Dale, stubborn, wanted a rational answer, so they followed the tracks the only way you could, around the loop, looking for where they broke off. They broke off heading away from camp, finally, a single line of prints walking off into the trees. So they followed that. The tracks went about 200 yards, a straight, clean line in 6 inches of snow, and then they stopped. Not petered out. Stopped, mid-stride, both feet together, in the middle of open snow with nothing overhead and nothing around. No more prints forward, none to the side. Fresh, unbroken powder in every direction past that last step, smooth as a bedsheet. Something had walked a straight line into the middle of a snowfield and taken a last step and not taken another one. There was nowhere for it to have gone that wouldn't have left a mark, and there was no mark. Dale stood at that last footprint and turned a full circle, and every direction was clean snow. They packed up and left. 2 grown men snowshoeing out fast, not talking, because there was nothing to say that didn't sound insane. Dale had wanted a rational answer. He got the opposite. He got proof, written in the one medium that can't lie, that something had walked to a spot in an open snowfield and simply ceased. He's hunted that forest since. He does not camp in it anymore. He says the snow is the thing he can't get around. Dirt you can argue with. Snow doesn't leave you the room. Tracks circling their tent that started from nowhere in untouched snow, walked off, and then ended mid-stride in an open field with clean powder in every direction. Here's what I keep landing on. Snow can't be faked and can't be brushed away without leaving the brushing. So the tracks are real, and they start from nothing and end at nothing. Either something can move without touching the ground at both ends of that walk, or we're missing something so simple we can't see it. Which answer can you live with? Tell me below. The last account is the one that gets me, because this hunter didn't find the tracks following him in. He found them already waiting at his stand, in the dark, before he got there. That's next. The tracks were already at his deer stand when he got there in the dark, which meant something had walked to the exact tree he hunts in the middle of the night and waited. Marcus hunted the Kisatchie down in Louisiana, the only national forest in the state, thick piney woods and swampy bottom. He had a stand he'd hunted for 6 seasons, a ladder stand fixed to one particular pine, and he walked into it every morning in the pitch dark, headlamp on, the way every deer hunter does, to be settled and quiet before first light. That morning, his headlamp caught the ground at the base of his tree, and he stopped cold. Tracks. Bipedal, bare, long and narrow, pressed into the soft, damp earth right at the foot of his ladder. A lot of them. Layered, like something had stood at his tree for a long time. He knew that ground. He'd walked it in the dark 6 seasons. Nobody else hunted this spot. It was a long way off any road, his private honey hole. And these tracks weren't his. His were boot prints, and he could see those too from previous mornings. These were bare, and they were fresh, made in the night, and they crowded the base of his tree like something had been waiting under his stand. He followed his headlamp around the tree, looking for where they came from, where they went. Same as the others, and I think you already know. They didn't come from anywhere. They didn't go anywhere. They were just there, gathered at the foot of the one tree in that whole forest he climbed into every morning, as if whatever made them knew exactly where he'd be and had come to wait for him and left before he arrived. Or hadn't left at all. Marcus did not climb that stand. He stood at the base of his own tree in the dark, headlamp shaking, and every instinct he had told him that climbing 15 feet up a ladder into a fixed position in the dark, with something's tracks crowded at the bottom, was the worst thing he could possibly do. He backed out the way he came, watching the dark the whole way, and drove home with the sun not yet up. He never hunted that stand again. Took it down, actually, drove out one afternoon in full daylight with a buddy and pulled it off the tree. He says he doesn't know what left those tracks. He just knows it had learned his spot. It knew the one tree in 100,000 acres he'd be walking to alone in the dark, and it got there first, and it waited. Tracks waiting at the base of the one tree he climbed alone every morning in the dark, layered like something had stood there a long time, with no trail in and no trail out. Here's the real question. All three of these got there first, ahead on the trail, circling a tent, waiting at a stand. So what does it mean that it always knows where you're going before you do? Is it worse if it's watching you long enough to learn your patterns, or if it doesn't need to watch at all, and just knows? Tell me which one sits worse with you. Subscribe to Obscure Nights right now. 3 hunters, 3 forests, a trail, a snowfield, a deer stand. None of them ever met, and everyone found bipedal tracks that got where they were going before they did, with no trail in or out. Here's the thread, and it isn't the tracks. It's the arriving first. It wasn't following behind. It was ahead. On ground they hadn't reached, at a camp they hadn't named, at a tree only one man hunted. I don't know what leaves a track and no exit, and neither do they. But here's what's worth keeping. Lesson 1. If you cut a track that seems to follow your route, change your route. Don't hike to the camp you planned. Don't climb the stand it's waiting under. It expects you where you said you'd be, so don't be there. Lesson 2. Trust tracks over reassurance. Every one of these men tried to talk himself out of what the ground plainly showed, and everyone was right the first time. Ground doesn't lie, and snow least of all. Believe it. Lesson 3. If it got there first, don't go in alone, and don't go in the dark. Marcus not climbing that stand is the whole lesson. A fixed position in the dark, with something already there, is the worst place you can put yourself. Back out, come back in daylight, or don't come back. Thank you for trusting Obscure Nights with these accounts. If you have an encounter of your own, our submission email is in the channel bio. We read every single one. This is Obscure Nights, where the cases nobody talks about get told the way they actually happened. Good night.